Well, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. So if you could please take your seats. So again, good evening. I'm Eric Porfelli. I serve as the interim dean of the College of Education and Human Ecology, and it's my great pleasure to welcome esteemed faculty, dedicated staff, uh, uh, committed alumni, and talented students to this year's Legacy Lecture. As context, today is also our EHE Research Forum, so a good part of today has been around centering and celebrating our students and the work that they do with our faculty and staff to advance their scholarship. And so if you think about it, a good fraction of today is about the future. It's about the future of our disciplines as reflected in the great work of our students and the support they receive from our distinguished faculty and great staff. And we end this day with our Legacy Lecture, which signals both the end of one's careers, but it also signals the possibilities of how their careers can inspire others. And so I am just very, very pleased to have all of you join us today as we learn about the distinguished work of our two very distinguished faculty, and also to consider how their work informs the current moment in our sciences and the sciences yet to come. This series is a space where we honor the voices, ideas, and contributions that have shaped various fields of scholarship and continue to inspire the future generations. This event culminates in a week of gatherings highlighting the very best of EHE. It has been a great reminder that the deepest purpose of our institution is not to fill minds with answers, no, but to cultivate the capacity to ask meaningful questions and think rigorously in the face of complexity. Certainly, complexity is on the rise ever more in our society. This idea that we educate how to think rather than what to think brings us to the work and scholarship of Dr. Patti Lather and Dr. Earl Harrison, both of whom challenge and expand how we understand knowledge, identity, and responsibility as educators and as scholars. As faculty emeriti, Dr. Lather and Dr. Harrison have not only shaped the intellectual landscape of our college, but their enduring commitments have laid the groundwork for innovative collaborative research and had an enduring impact on the evolution of their fields. Their strong legacy continues to inspire new generations of EHE scholars who are building upon their solid foundations as they establish and carry forward their dedication to critical inquiry and transformative education. Thank you to the Planning Committee for making this event possible. Let's give them a round of applause. And thank each of you for being here to honor the legacy of our distinguished faculty. Your engagement is what makes this series a meaningful and enduring tradition, and it's your engagement that marks the identity of our college, a college of great diversity in thought, great diversity in peoples, and a great diversity of sciences. I'd like to now invite distinguished Dr. Amanda Bird, Associate Professor in the Department of Human Sciences, to the podium to introduce Dr. Harrison, our first lecturer. Thank you.
Okay, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Earl Harrison. In my short intro, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to just give you sort of some of the history of Earl, and then I'm actually going to go on and talk about his legacy. So for those of you who didn't know, Earl actually started his career. He earned his MPhil and his PhD at Columbia University and actually completed his postdoctoral training at Rockefeller University. From there, he switched to become an assistant professor, actually in biological chemistry at Wright State University. And he actually became an associate professor in the Medical College of Pennsylvania. And now I think what's really special about Earl's sort of history is from there, he actually didn't just continue with academia, he actually switched and went and worked for the USDA. So Earl transitioned to actually the USDA Human Nutrition Research Center, where he actually became the research leader of both the Diet and Human Performance Laboratory and the Phytonutrients Laboratory. Now, he obviously missed academia because he came back. So after that, Earl joined us here at The Ohio State University, where he actually was the Dean's Distinguished Professor of Human Nutrition. Now, Earl's going to tell you a lot more about this, but his research here focused on mechanisms involved in the intestinal absorption of dietary vitamin A and provitamin A carotenoids. I should say he's published extensively. I checked. He's got nearly 10,000 citations as of this morning. He's secured millions of dollars in grant funding, largely from the NIH. And I should say he's received many awards. Most recently, he was named as a Distinguished Fellow of the American Society for Nutrition. Now, I could go on with listing awards and grants, but since this is a legacy lecture, what I wanted to do was just briefly talk about what Earl leaves through his mentorship. So I actually reached out to several of his former trainees and asked them to reflect on their experiences in Earl's lab. Now, they all sent really long, heartfelt messages, so I'm only going to give you little snippets from a few of them. So I'm going to start with actually Matt Fleshman, who is actually now a very successful research scientist at Abbott Nutrition. He was also Earl's first graduate student here at OSU. So Matt said, "I was honored to be Dr. Harrison's first graduate student, and apart from guiding my research projects and sharing his wealth of knowledge, he always was available for further discussions and advice." Now, Matt also said, Big E, as we referred to him in the lab. So actually, I should just stop there because actually we did not know, Earl, you were also called Big E, so we may have to take that comment up there. But going back to Matt's note, Big E showed me the importance of collaborations and thought-driven solutions to novel problems. I also reached out to Karim Iruglu, who's now an assistant professor, a very successful one, at North Carolina State University, running his own research lab. Karim said, "Earl was far more than my graduate advisor. He was a steady and grounding presence during one of my most formative periods of my life and beyond." I wish I could read you his entire email. It really is heartwarming. The other part I took was, Krim also said, "What I value most is his unwavering support. His mentorship extended beyond the lab. We exchanged visits to each other's homes in Columbus and shared countless moments of laughter and conversation, which I cherish deeply." The last, I've also got some comments here from Bolu, so Bo Jurajay, who's now a nutritional scientist at Kate Farms. And I should also add, Bolu, I know, Bo, you're online, so hopefully you're listening to this. He also shared lots of memories, so I'm just going to summarize a few of those. So Bo completed his master's and PhD in Earl's lab, and he was actually Earl's final PhD trainee here at OSU. Bo described how grateful he is to have been matched with Earl as a mentor, and how that relationship continues to shape his life and career. One of the most meaning legacies Earl left him, he said, was learning how to lead. Even in his training, in his early training, Earl encouraged Bo to take on leadership roles, both in the lab and in the broader Ohio State nutrition community, and he supported him at every step of the way. He even mentioned that during a time when Bo's research project kind of slowed due to circumstances outside his control, Earl supported him, taking on a new major leadership role, organizing the Russell Klein Nutrition Research Symposium. And it was through that experience that Bo developed leadership skills that he is still using today. He shared that Earl consistently showed up with patience, kindness, and genuine care for his growth, and today he's actually incredibly proud to honour Earl during this legacy lecture. So I just want to end by saying that every single student I reached out to shared essentially the same feeling, profound gratitude for Earl's guidance and for the enduring impact that he's had on their lives and careers. So on that note, Earl, your legacy is not only evident in your scholarship, but in the people you've mentored and the lives you shaped. So it's my great honour to introduce our colleague, mentor and friend, Earl Harrison.
That was quite an introduction, Amanda, so thank you. Can we get the lights out? Is that possible? That are fit in the eyes of the speakers? Anyway, maybe not. All right, so we'll just go over here. And now it's getting too dark. Well, I want to thank Eric for, obviously, for nominating me to do this, and even more importantly, for telling me what I should do when I get up here. But actually, I liked Amanda's introduction because I'm going to now do, for the people who were my mentors, what my wonderful students just said about me. So I wanted to start with that because, again, my legacy basically has to do with the gifts of mentorship and also of concern and setting, telling me how to do things and showing me how to do things. So I'm going to just go through those people quickly. I can. So these are my graduate mentors from Don McCormick, my master's degree, Dewitt Goodman, my PhD, and Christian Dedew for my postdoc. I had good department chairs, as Amanda mentioned, Bob Weissman at Wright State University and Julian Marsh at the Medical College of Pennsylvania. And then, as she said, I did leave academia to go to the Nutrition Center in Beltsville, Maryland, and Joseph Spence was the director there. My lab was there for about 8 years. And you're right, Amanda, I basically did miss academia because we didn't have students. So I wanted to come back to get, I didn't want to necessarily get out, but I had a really good opportunity because at the time, OSU, I really came to OSU because of this. These are colorful fruits and vegetables, which is what the carotenoids that I work on are found in. And Ohio State was really the place to come to do this because it also was a center for this kind of research, and I wanted to acknowledge what I started doing. These three folks, Mark Faila, Professor of Nutrition and Department Chair, Steve Clinton, who's a Professor of Medicine and the Director of the Molecular Carcinogenesis and Chemoprevention, and most importantly, Steve Schwartz, a Professor of Food Science. They put together a number of initiatives while they were here, including the Center for Advanced Functional Food Research and Entrepreneurship. Important for us, for me in particular, was the work that Steve did in running the nutrient and phytochemical analytical shared resource. This allowed us to do things in terms of analyzing chemicals that would be hard for anybody else to do. I could not do it myself, and then again, Steve was running this program. So when I got here, the first thing I did was actually call Steve, who I had seen at many of the carotenoid conferences, and I also got in touch with Bob Curley, if I could get a pointer on him. He's was a professor of he's a professor, emeritus professor now of medicinal chemistry. So we had these three different overlapping technical expertise, and basically that led us to be able to do really exciting work. I can't go through it all, but I'm going to go through quickly only one aspect of it. But so what we did was see, this is there we go. So we're interested in a group of compounds called apocarotenoids. So when we started doing this collaboration back in 2009, we put together, we didn't really call it anything at the time, but it was the apocarotenoid group. And this was the students, staff, research associates in our respective laboratories. And, excuse me, I have to get a little water now. better. So these people are the ones responsible for all the work I'm going to show you, which is I'm going to try to go through it very quickly because we're only given 11 to 15 minutes. But what I want to point out is this is a lot of people from different departments. The students were in food science and technology, some in human nutrition, some in the interdisciplinary program in nutrition, some in the Ohio State biochemistry program, and one in the biophysics program. So what were we interested in? Well, we were interested in what are called apocarotenoids, and I'm going to have to show you some chemical structures and describe some pathways. So beta-carotene is the molecule that makes the pigments of the fruits and vegetables. It's actually converted to vitamin A, and in fact, most people in the world get most of their vitamin A from having fruits and vegetables rather than having animal products. It's converted to a molecule called retinaldehyde, or vitamin A aldehyde, by an enzyme we call BCO1. Importantly, this vitamin A aldehyde can be converted to another kind of vitamin A called retinoic acid. Now, there's another enzyme that was discovered more recently, BCO2, which actually then cuts the beta-carotene molecule here and gives you these compounds. However, what we know, and what Steve and his group knew, and others around the country, was there are all these apocarotenoids that are found, and they're found in foods. So there's a whole series of these things, but there's no known enzymes that make those. So the question is, how do these form? Well, it turns out that was known because those are formed by chemical oxidation or by oxidative stress like smoking, or chemical oxidation that might take place during cooking of food. So again, if you took beta-carotene and you cut it here, if I can get the cut to go, there we go, you get two molecules. One is called beta-apo13 carotenone, the other is called beta-apo14 carotenal. These are funny names. And these two compounds are interesting, particularly this one, because we found that it actually is a vitamin A antagonist. That is to say, it has an anti-vitamin A activity. But first, let me show you, this is again from this is Matt Fleshman's paper. So we have cantaloupe and orange dew, which is basically a smooth-skinned cantaloupe, and this just shows that over here the mass spectrometry, the data that basically how we measure this, or how Steve's group would measure this, and here are some standards. The point of all this is basically you can see all of these materials are found in these orange flesh melons, and all of these materials are found in almost all carotenoid-rich food sources from plants, because there are no carotenoids in animal products. So what we did, there was another feature that was important. That apo13 carotenone, which I just mentioned is an anti-vitamin A type compound, was also present in human plasma. These are 6 different samples. It's present in very, very small amounts. It's called nanomoles, so it's 10 to the minus 8th moles. But what was exciting to us is that's a very small amount, and we knew that, but that's exactly the concentration that retinoic acid is found in plasma, and it functions. So this suggested that this was a potent antagonist that was actually had as much affinity for this receptor that is necessary for retinoic acid function. So I'm just going to show you 2 slides about that. So retinoic acid functions as a hormone by binding to a protein called a retinoic acid receptor. This is retinoic acid over here. Whoops, going to go there. Retinoic acid can go into a cell, go into the nucleus, and it binds to what's called a transcription factor, and that transcription factor is called a retinoic acid receptor. When that happens, it allows, I'm going to go back. It allows these receptors to bind to DNA, to sequences in DNA, which actually then drive the expression of those genes. And so vitamin A is responsible for the regulation of hundreds and several thousand genes directly by activating them through this receptor. So and we showed that this is just a cartoon that Bob had. This shows that, like I just showed you that little cartoon where there was a little pocket in that cartoon. This is actually Bob's molecular or computational modeling of these structures. The green is the retinoic acid receptor. Here's what the pocket sort of looks like, so to speak. And what he showed is that retinoic acid, obviously in red here, shows that it obviously binds to the pocket because that's what its function is. Importantly, in purple, that's the apo13 carotenoid. It binds in an almost identical way and then blocks the activity of retinoic acid. So this means it's an antagonist. So agonists are things that increase the effects, and antagonists are things that block an effect. So what is an application of this? And I'll be brief about that. So it turns out back in the 90s, there was a lot of epidemiology that suggested that vitamin A and beta carotene might reduce the incidence of lung cancer. And so in the late 90s, they decided to actually try to prove this directly with a controlled prospective primary prevention trial. So this trial, which was called the CARROT trial, involved taking 18,000 smokers, former smokers, or asbestos workers, and giving them, well, first of all, why do these people are the ones chosen? That's because they're at very, very high risk of getting lung cancer. So that would be a population you would want to use and to see if you could have some effect on future lung cancer. They gave these people daily 30 milligrams of beta carotene and 10,000 international units of retinol. The specific numbers are not important, except what really is important is that this amount of retinol, or vitamin A, is about 5 times the usual intake of vitamin A. And this amount of beta carotene is 15 times the usual intake of beta carotene. So they did this trial, and this kind of graph was seen around the world, so to speak, because this shows the cumulative incidence of lung cancer over, this is going out to 5 or 6 years here. This is the people who did not get the intervention, and this is the people who did get the intervention. So far from having a positive effect on this incidence of cancer, it actually increased the amount of cancer. So what went wrong? Well, it's a paper in Carcinogenesis that was published in 2014. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but basically this person says, well, what happened? And what he says in his commentary is that if nothing happens, if the answer is not yes or no, that suggests that you might just have the wrong agent. So maybe you should have another compound that you're looking at. But if there's an increase in the risk, it strongly suggests that the premise or that the theory is actually wrong and not the agent. And he goes on to say finally down here, why could this happen? And he says excentric cleavage products of beta carotene could basically then, because they can act as antagonists, and he cites reference 18, which is the paper from which I showed you the data just a minute ago. So this suggests then that there's a problem with having beta carotene at those high quantities, and in fact it was enough to any trials now that used to use combinations of beta carotene or vitamin E. Now the beta carotene is taken out of trials. Nobody can usually do a trial anymore that contains beta carotene because of this idea that it can actually could cause problems in smokers and people at high risk. So with that, I'd like to, thank the people, everybody in the, back again first. Oops. All right. Obviously, all the people who did the work, that is all the students I showed you and talked about. I'd also like to talk about just acknowledge some long-term collaborators and to mention that a few of these people, including William Blainer and Janet Novotny at USDA, actually took part and collaborated with us on some of the studies that I'm talking about today. So with that, I will thank you. I'll be happy to take questions. But I think I'm coming down.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. My name is Brian Warnick. I'm from the Department of Educational Studies. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Patti Lather, who's a Professor Emerita of Education here at Ohio State. And she's a leading theorist in feminist approaches to qualitative inquiry. She was born in what I understand to be the cosmopolitan metropolis of Huron, South Dakota. She taught high school history and English, and then went on to earn her PhD at Indiana University. Patti came to Ohio State in 1988 and quickly established herself as a leading scholar in research methodology. My own path would cross with Patti in 2005 when I came here as a young doctoral candidate. I was wet behind the ears, and I was interviewing here for an open faculty position. By then, Patti was something of a legendary figure in educational research. When I saw her walk into my job talk, I remember feeling this wave of anxiety and intimidation. We'll come back to that moment in a minute. But right now I want to introduce you to Patti, both in her professional and her personal background. First, the professional. Patti was one of the scholars who helped develop the idea of research as praxis. The idea here is that we have completely misunderstood what it means to do rigorous social science. In most people's minds, the scientific researcher stands above politics and value judgments, at a distance from those who are being studied, free from bias, totally objective, providing clarity, reveling in knowledge for its own sake. Patti, I think it's fair to say, to put this in highly technical terms, would think that this is all hogwash. Why? Human beings for Patti, both researchers and research participants, are meaning-making beings, very different from rocks or atoms or galaxies. Quality social science research for Patti is accomplished not through scientifically distancing ourselves from people we want to understand, but through actively seeking out their help and participation as we construct and co-interpret a fuller and more inclusive picture of the social world. Scientific rigor for Patti isn't really necessarily a bad idea, but rigor comes through not pretending some scholarly, neutral objectivity, but by being open about our own biases, engaging in constant dialogue with others who can see things that we cannot yet see, and producing knowledge that actually helps people who live at the margins of our society. She develops these ideas with great force in her 1991 book, Getting Smart, and she enacts these ideas brilliantly in an experimental 1977 book about women living with HIV/AIDS, Troubling the Angels. In this later book, it is fascinating to see how the women's voices are featured, along with the voices of the researchers, in co-interpreting a messy complexity of the social world. Did I say messy? Yeah, messy. One thing Patti wants to emphasize is the role of the researcher in tolerating messiness and maybe even creating a little bit of messiness, working against the need to find more clarity and easy answers. We usually think that we want science to answer our most pressing questions. Patti reminds us, however, that the social researcher has another role to play, not to answer questions, but to question answers. For Patti, we need to be held accountable to this messiness and find value in not being sure. She talks about all this in her 2009 book, Engaging Science Policy from the Side of the Messy, which is actually my personal favorite of your books. There's much more that I could say about Patti's professional record, her award-winning books, her long list of influential publications, her recognitions and awards at the highest levels of educational research. For example, her AERA and ICQI Lifetime Achievement Awards. But for now, will simply say that reading her CV is a tour through a scholarly life of profound significance. And now a more personal note. I recall that feeling of intimidation as I gave my job talk here at Ohio State. On that day, though, I found that Patti was not only listening politely to what I had to say, she was listening deeply. She seemed genuinely curious about what she might learn from me, a nobody who had not yet finished his dissertation. I came to find out that this is just who she is. This listening, this attentiveness, this openness, this curiosity to learn from the other. Not only did these things make her an amazing researcher, but they also made her a wonderful colleague and friend. These qualities, listening, attentiveness, not only had academic significance, but also profound moral significance. And this is something I've tried to emulate in my own career. So with that introduction, I present to you Dr. Patti Lather.
Oh, that's a clear, thank you.
The world is a mess.
Oh, we'll start right off with the mess, yeah. And I also wanted to say, my comments will make it clear what the dean was talking to in contrast with, in concert with Earl's comments on how wide the spectrum is of the work that goes on under the umbrella of our college. Because I'm going to be talking about a very different kind of work in terms of my academic journey. I too have been instructed tightly on what to talk about. So my journey before you today, my sense of legacy at this point in time, and then whatever futuring one has after, 12 years of retirement. That might have something to do with the academy. So the journey, I'm a child of fortune in terms of the historical times that got me here. I came of age in a countercultural moment, feminism, Vietnam War, civil rights, the times they were a-changing, and so was I. Second wave feminism started for me as an undergraduate at South Dakota State University with the wonderful Dr. Ruth Alexander, who was my mentor in the English department, but she'd gotten her PhD in American Studies, which nobody had ever heard of at that time. That was an interdisciplinary look at American culture, and it was so refreshing a perspective. That feminism structured my MA work at Purdue, where I looked at the role of women in the history and literature of the last West. And then that interdisciplinarity of American studies got in my bones and sent me off to, when I decided to get the doctorate after teaching high school, which I'll come back to, took me to Indiana University, where I lucked into, talk about a lucky child of history, they had just started the women's studies minor the year I got there. So I got to be in the first class of the women's studies minor. And I got to know, let's see, slides. Let's see here. Well, there we go. Sandra Harding was very important to me in terms of feminist methodology and feminist philosophy of science. And then Egon Guba, who was, again, just a lucky historical moment. He had been a very famous positivist in program evaluation at Indiana, and he had what he called a paradigm conversion. And he had switched from quantitative to qualitative, interestingly, through journalism is where he started out with. But this was a sign that he gave to all of us in his classes, which was how we were educated. So thank you, Egon. The PhD came. I want to get out of those lights too. Here, this is much better here. The PhD came after 4 years of teaching high school history and literature in a time when teachers were free to put their curriculum together. I taught the book. I was very committed to the idea that the kids should read the whole book from beginning to end, the span of American history. But I also supplemented it with many materials. And then we had great discussions of why wasn't this stuff in the book? And we all got smarter, although particularly some trouble from some parents. The first year I had a unit on communes, and that didn't go down well. That was considered communist by some folks in small town Indiana. The second year I got in trouble for, teaching that a woman invented the cotton gin, which I can document, by the way. The third year I got in trouble for LGBTQ unit that we did on the gay rights movement at the time. This was in the 70s, kind of mid-70s. That got me in a little bit of trouble. So year 4, my principal and I decided it was time for me to get a PhD. He said I was too smart to be a high school teacher, which I thought was stunningly awful. He did not mean it unkindly, but I thought this a pitiful assessment of what teaching could be, high school teaching could be, and decided on education as a field of study in order to make high school teaching possible for people like me to stay in it. Because I would have stayed in it forever. I love teaching those 16 and 17-year-old kids. Their minds are so fertile and open, sometimes. So off to IU, where I lucked into the aforementioned women's studies minor in Egon Guba's paradigm courses. Egon asked me once how I got so smart, and I told him it was the combination of women's studies and education and the ways they didn't fit. They were really in quite interruptive of one another, and so that got my mind kind of actually thinking creatively. And in 1983, I was off to my first academic job. It was Egon had told me, he said, "Don't get a women's studies minor; you'll never get a job." So when I graduated with the PhD in 1983, my job was in women's studies. Thank you very much. Where I was the most conservative member of the faculty, and activism was definitely on the curriculum during the Reagan years. Here I taught the feminist research methodology course that led to my first book. Well, maybe. There, that book. This was a study of student resistance to liberatory curriculum. Student resistance to liberatory curriculum. Remember, I'm in women's studies. We want to make all these students little feminists. And not all of them were in 100% agreement here. The book concluded with a chapter with the title, Staying Dumb, ? And it ends up that the question mark was really important because it got me asking, well, what is this resistance? How come they don't want to be liberated the way feminist pedagogy thought they should be? What was the romance of feminist pedagogy? What imposition, the way I said it was, what sins of imposition are being created in the name of liberation? So that book also tried to address this Foucault and postmodernism stuff that was everywhere, which all led me to here at OSU, where I was hired. And I've tried to find the job description because it's hard to believe it now, but the call for the job wanted a feminist, critical, qualitative researcher. I said, I am your woman. And they agreed. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Students were hungry for critical theory, and resources were unbelievable, including they let me I had already had a Fulbright to New Zealand lined up, and OSU let me have one of those wonderful research quarters so I could go. And this allowed me to engage with a much more dominant Marxist theory milieu, which was kind of the dominant thing in Australia at that time. In my empirical research, I chose sites that allowed me to address the theoretical issues that I found intriguing in getting smart, teaching countless women's studies courses, introduction to women's studies courses, provided a fertile site for exploring the various resistances that students have to being liberated. The second book, that's not the second book. Oh, where'd the second book go? There it is. Second book, is Chris here? Chris Smithies? Hi, darling. I co-wrote this with Chris Smithies. Women's stories of their experiences of living with HIV/AIDS allowed me to explore the changing conditions of feminist research under the postmodern turn, which was just sweeping across the disciplines at that time in the social sciences. Nobody quite knew what to do with it, but it was a wonderful opportunity to explore those issues. In this case, what Chris and I came to call naked methodology after various hot tub sessions. Let's see here. Then there was, let's see, we missed one, didn't we? Then this book. Getting Lost was a book about a book, in this case, the Angel's Book, and the ethical issues involved in making a career out of the tragedies of others. And if you think about that a minute, you can understand. At that time, AIDS was a death sentence in the early 90s. We were dealing with women who were under a lot of problems. The fourth book, this one, Brian's favorite. And I want to say I commissioned a local artist to do that cover. And it was supposed to be messy. And I think he did a really good job. A big dose of both feminism and Foucault as it addresses questions of what kind of science, for what kind of policy, for what kind of politics. And again, look at that. What kind of science, for what kind of policy, for what kind of politics. And then post-retirement came an edited collection. Oh, that one. There it is. An edited collection about my work. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This one is me. I chose those. And then this one is about me and my work. And this also will be in there's another one coming out on the Journal of Curriculum Theorizing, which includes sometimes dizzyingly my writing about others' writings about me, or as Bette Midler says, enough about me, what do you think about me? To what I've now added, what do you think about what I think about you? No, that's not quite right. What do I think about what you think about me? There we go. So on to the legacy part. I was a feminist before I was a Marxist, and that has made all the difference. Such a statement might get me in some trouble in these days of academic surveillance, what Foucault would call discipline and punishment. But what this evokes is a career of working within and against the academy, finding feminist methodology and qualitative research as homes for thinking about what might be possible in the very social justice commitments for which the academy is so under suspicion. Wake work, woke work, dark woke, which is a new term I've learned. That's called woke 2.0, and it's kind of bad girl woke, not so polite. To speak quantitatively, one way to assess the reach of an academic career is to do a citation impact study, which Earl's introducer did for him. Another is book sales, which Chris and I always go out to McDonald's when we get our checks from the pub. So you don't make a fortune in academic publishing. But qualitatively speaking, my sense of legacy is to see how my work is put to work in other people's work. So that's what I'm going to give you 3 examples of that. The first comes from Ireland, where Catherine Conlon used operatic form. And Catherine's on the, whatever it is, the streamer thing around the world. So hi, Catherine. Used operatic form to give voice to qualitative research data in enacting an engaged collaborative social science, combining music, philosophy, and social theory into a commissioned empirical policy study concerning women's concealed pregnancy, which was a thing in Ireland before abortion was legalized. Women who didn't have the money to go over to England concealed pregnancies. Conlon repurposes an interview transcript into an opera that is performed using a confessional staging, and there you can kind of see the confessional booth in the back there, that includes a singer, a flautist, and an audience member, as well as a wandering chorus in this study of surveillance, regulation, and the cultural appropriation of women's fertile bodies. And that's on the campus of Trinity College, Dublin. A second example of putting my work to work is the way the Angels book has provided a template for many dissertations and books. Groundbreaking and polarizing feminist ethnography at the limits of representation. And any of you who know anything about that postmodern stuff know about that. Worrying about how do we represent? How do you represent in these days? Kind of not so much post-truth as troubling everything. This has resulted in both experimental texture forms, but perhaps most importantly, a wrestling with what it means to tell other people's stories. This includes not losing them in a flurry of academic theorizing and methodological brooding, which I'm very good at, up against the refusal to tell the straight-ahead story, too easily assimilated as the real. Here's the real story, the innocent story. Such a desire evoked what I came to call doubled practices. Such practices both use and trouble conventional ethnography, working the ruins, which became a big phrase for me, of all I had been taught about feminist qualitative research. Its desire to cure or save, its need to face the limits of the romances involved in voice and experience, its fall into empathy at the expense of structural analysis. And there's my Marxism. Trying to inscribe the injustices of history into a readable place. The book has been used in medical courses as well as HIV support groups and many a qualitative research course across the disciplines. Now here's just one page from the book that Chris and I paid a great deal of money to have laid out professionally. So what you've got across the top is the women's words from the interviews we did. And at the bottom, you've got Chris and myself talking about telling their stories. And then in the middle over there is, well, I'm not even going to try, what we call the text box, which were full of information on HIV/AIDS. So in some ways it was as up to the minute as we could make it, but that stuff was changing all the time. So that was an interesting experience too, trying to keep the latest information floating around the pages. Finally, a gander through titles and citation counts reveals much use made of key concepts that I developed over the years. No, where'd that come from? Oh, help, help, people. Go back. This is my second PowerPoint. I've never done many of these, but, well, anyway. No, I should insist, Janet, my techno specialist. Can you do it? Janet did the slides. Did I get it? Oh, it's a miracle. Go forward. There, thank you. It was just the idea that you were coming up to help me that made it work. All right, so research is praxis, as Brian mentioned that one. That made my career and actually got me my job here, so thank you very much. Validity after post-structuralism, that's Egon Guba. He was a big validity guy. And so that I was able to use that and translate it into qualitative, well, in a way, terms, but Egon did it in qualitative terms. I took it more into critical terms. Working the ruins was my idea that you don't get rid of stuff, you reuse it somehow. You shift it and make it available in new ways. Getting Lost was one of the books Oh, now I'm all screwed up again. There, okay. I'll stay there for a minute. The uses and perhaps abuses of these key concepts are in evidence in a recent edited collection on methodology and praxis with the subtitle. No. Where'd it go? Oh, well, anyway. The subtitle is Thinking with Patti Lather. Across education policy methodology, the qual-quant relationship, something called Latherian theorizing, and even jujitsu, the uses of critical social theory and feminist methods are brought to life in the context of wide-ranging empirical work. A major criticism over the years has been that my writing is too theoretical and dense. My reply to this was an article in 1996 in the Harvard Ed Review called Troubling Clarity, The Politics of Accessible Language, where I basically argued the non-innocence of plain language, plain English, and said that there's a place for complicated language, theoretical language. But I also attempted in the Angels book, Chris was on me, helping me keep going to try to reach a broader audience. We were dedicated that the women themselves should be able to read the book about them. So that was a big inspiration to kind of tap it down, tap the theory down. And what I decided to do instead was to do the theory in the way the book was laid out, as opposed to talking about the theory. And that made it more accessible, I think. But I was also dedicated to have my mother able to understand the book. She had, I had given her my first book, and they live in northern Minnesota, and she had said, I think I'll wait for the blizzard to read this. So this book I wanted her to be able to understand. But I'm not redeemed, and theorizing about methodology and what I've called philosophical ethnography remains my perverse pleasure, including my dawning interest in a quantum social science, a direction in which we are perhaps moving. Oh, go backwards. Janet! Keep hitting the back one? Well, you going to do it?
I'm going to give it a try.
Give it a try. If you can bring up Karen Barad's book on quantum something. Forward? One forward. Oh, there she is, Karen Barad. Meeting the Universe Halfway by Karen Barad is one of those books, 2007, that just swept across feminist methodology. And everybody started talking that way. And then if you could do one more, Dean. There, Quantum Social Science. This is Alexander Wendt, who I strongly recommend this book. He's on the poli-sci faculty here at OSU, and for 3 summers, he ran a quantum theory boot camp that he did on Zoom. So he had people from all over the world speaking to what it meant to try to bring quantum thinking to the social sciences. Just mind-blowing stuff. In sum, in terms of where the field might be heading, I see further fleshing out of the non-reductionist methodologies that qualitative work has long embraced. Methods that mix qual-quant as rooted in the blurring of art, science, and philosophy. I see research that foregrounds the fragilities of emergence, where uncertainty is featured given the dynamism of indeterminacy and the many beginnings that lay in wait. And if we just took that one sentence apart, you would begin to understand what I mean by a quantum social science. Here we think with and through shifting ephemeral assemblages toward what Anna Thing, one more please, in her wonderful book on mushrooms and capitalism, move into a different kind of, focusing more on entanglements. Here, my hope is that we move from both plotting instrumentalism on the one hand and a collapse into autoethnography on the other, that collapse into the me stuff on the other hand, toward a critical project that is not about individual but collective procedures, a very social and material enterprise where we start where we are. So finally, the future of my academic work. The truth is that I'm pretty much done with scholarly work, but I will nonetheless conclude by mentioning 2 lost projects and one that might be achievable. One lost focus has been my interest in a cultural studies of numeracy. My interest is in using the incalculables of becoming to unbind the quantitative from positivism. Think about that. It's not about throwing the quantitative out. It's about unbinding it from positivism and then using it in our work. In the face of the uncertainty at the heart of contemporary philosophies of knowledge. While just saying such words gives me a thrill, I have made a peace with letting this one go. A more difficult project to let go of is a study of the uses of Walter Benjamin in a cultural analysis of the weight of sports on U.S. secondary schooling. My dad was a coach. I grew up with that stuff. As a teacher, you see how it works in the schools. My big question was, do we hire teachers or coaches? And any of you who've been in an American high school since World War II know the answer to that question. Using Walter Benjamin's The Arcades Project, unfinished by him I might add, I got as far as a very detailed chapter outline in the hopes somebody would pick it up and run with it, but to no avail as far as I know, except Sarah Childers, who was one of my doctoral students, who looked at a no sports curriculum alternative school a few years back. So if you could advance one more, there it is. This is Walter Benjamin and his Angel of History. But I do have one project that I can't imagine, and the final slide, there it is, for which I actually have a long-running contract and even a mock-up of the cover. Here's the bad girl page. I have a cover, but no book. And that picture was taken by Janet Russell, and she wants the photo credit. She wants me to write the book so that she can get the photo credit. So I'm very inspired. The proposed book collects pieces either never published or sort of lost in the Vita somewhere. But one example is my Tank Girl speech addressed in the early 1990s to a curriculum committee tasked with program approval in a much contested college restructuring. And as I look across the audience here, were any of you part of that early 1990s college restructuring? I don't see enough gray hairs to have very many people here, but shuttling between forms and genres of academic writing, I would hope to weave the history of my time in the academy, accented with backstory and a little gossip too. To conclude, I have long seen myself and my published work as an outcome of feminist community and collaboration. Across the books and articles and presentations and around the world, I've offered a body of work rooted in exploring feminist ways of knowing across varied theoretical frameworks. And boy, have I had a good time doing it. Thank you. Can you get through?
Dr. Earl Harrison, Dr. Patti Lather. Well, thank you both for your thoughtful and engaging talks. They were fantastic. And one of the things that struck me is, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, and I anticipated, the great diversity of our college and how it's reflected in the people and the perspectives that you all shared. It's been a great honor to hear your perspectives, so thank you for them. So let's now shift to an informal conversation with some questions. I'm going to start with one for both of you, and that is, you've both worked across disciplines. Interdisciplinary work is clearly a mark within your portfolio. So Earl, you've focused in on biochemistry, nutrition, and other fields, and Patti, you've worked across many areas of the social sciences. And I'm curious how this interdisciplinary work has shaped your perspective, your research, and the kinds of questions that you ask.
You want to take that first, Earl? You want
go
me to
ahead.
go
Yeah,
first?
please.
Okay, well, history, even though I was trained in literature, literary analysis, but I think in some ways, like the literary analysis part, I was able to bring to methodology. That's where the idea of narrating methodology comes from, using those same skills of literary criticism to look at social science methodology. Who would have thought that it would work so well? Yeah. But it does. Mm-hmm. And let's see, maybe one other example of, it teaches you to come at it from all these different directions. What got me excited when I was a young professor at a small college in Minnesota, I would go to the University of Wisconsin every summer and go to their library. And they had every journal you ever heard of was right there in front of you. And I started with A, and I didn't go home until I got to Z. And I went through all the kind of social science journals, and I took my notes, and then I, of course, would take notes on the notes. But to see how ideas travel across the disciplines, that's when I got excited.
Expansive curiosity, seeing themes across the expanse, and then drawing from them.
So whatever you think you're doing in your little corner of the world, how is that related to all the other disciplines and that sort of thing? So that was food for
Thank you.
Work, yeah.
Earl?
Well, if it wasn't for the interdisciplinary stuff, I would have no questions. I would have no future, because what it really boils down to is, in our fields, basically, or my field, my interpretation of it is that you only have a certain area of expertise. If all you do for your entire career is stay within that particular area of expertise, you'll have some papers, but you probably won't have the impact that you have if you realize, well, I got to go talk to Bob Curley because I need some compounds that I can't make, and I got to go talk to Steve because I need some assays that I can't do.
Yeah, and I found it interesting, Earl, how in your remarks about those individuals and their teams, that how much of it is place-based for you, right? So at OSU, all of these teams existed, and that created an interesting context, right?
I had done a lot of other, I have a lot of collaborations. I mentioned a few at the end, but it's always easier to have a collaboration where you can walk down the street than it is that you have to get on a plane or even get on the phone, or even with Zoom and that kind of stuff. It's just better to be able to talk to people on site.
And given the wet lab nature of your work, the physical aspects of it, having a university like Ohio State where various elements of that could occur in place is uniquely powerful.
Exactly.
So Patti, question for you. You've long challenged traditional ideas about objectivity and authority in research. How do you see these concepts evolving, especially in our current climate?
Let's let the current climate sit to the side for just a minute. Objectivity is one of those central terms to the scientific process that is just always moving. It's not static. It moves across disciplines, and it moves across historical periods. And there was a time in feminist methodology, for example, where you threw it out. It was worthless. It was patriarchal. And then people like Sandra Harding, who was a philosopher of science, and other science studies people argued, no. You want to figure out how to redraw it so that it's still useful, but you're interrupting it. It's this double practice thing. You're using it and troubling it at the same time. And so I did a thing early on in validity. Validity was all about have you captured the thing itself, the truth of the thing. And so I wrote a piece called Validity, Openly Ideological Validity, and the idea that we still want to figure out how to do justice to the thing itself, but it's always within, there's open ideological frameworks and there's closed ideological frameworks, and the closed ideological frameworks claim that this is a mirror. And the openly ideological will say, no, we're always projecting and reframing. It's a frame, and frames get reframed. So there's just one example of how objectivity is used and shifted in various contexts.
Are we going to keep the current climate
Oh,
to
the
the
current
side?
climate. Well, some people say we're in a post-truth. You'll see the words post-truth. I still like Stephen Colbert's truthiness concept, which I think was in the early 2000s. That came in the Bush. That was a Bush that came in the Bush years. Truthiness, that appearance of truth. Has it got truthiness or not? But I just, I, in a way, refuse to engage with some of it. What I want to do, again, is do justice to the people I work with and their stories. And do it in such a way that I'm not replicating this idea that there's innocent stories. That what they say, what they say is the real. No, what they say is framed through their frames. So it's no more real than this other real. Well, maybe not. You know, maybe there are more reals than other reals. But I want to explore those questions. That's the point.
Thank you, Patti. Earl, staying on that theme of the here and now, what's happening now, the field of precision nutrition is rapidly growing.
Yeah.
How does your work on carotenoids and vitamin A metabolism contribute to tailoring diets for individual outcomes?
Well, I think we have people in the audience who actually are carrying on that, doing it as we speak. Rachel Kopak comes to mind. So maybe she wants to talk about precision nutrition. But to give you sort of a technical example, so if you ask, you know, how much beta carotene do you need to have an equivalent amount of vitamin A? The answer is, if you're eating vegetables, you need 12 micrograms of beta carotene for every microgram of vitamin A. And that's what's that's what policy put together with, that's what all kinds of things are based on. Well, we already know, even from our work, not some of the stuff I talked about, but basically we know that BCO1 enzyme that converts, there are variants of that do it more poorly, there are variants that do it better. So I think the concept that I think should come through is that when you think of all the metabolism that has to go on to get certain pathways to work, you know, what if people are very good at step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and okay at 5? Well, they're going to be better off than people who are bad at step 1, step 2. But the point of all this is that it's the sort of the sum total of what the activities are of all these things that are going to talk about really how things work. So I think my concept of precision nutrition, you know, could have theoretically would be basically if you could understand in detail what this kind of phenotype, what they call a haplotype in immunology, this group of processes, what they are in individual 1 versus individual 2, that might mean individual 1 needs twice the amount of beta carotene that individual 2 needs. So that's my concept of precision nutrition, and kind of, but many people, I mean, that's true not only for our own work and work in carotenoids and stuff, but work in lipid metabolism, work in all kinds of things.
I'm just sensing a bridge between you two, and this wasn't occurring to me until just now, but clearly what you're talking about is, you know, perspective matters in the sciences. Who you are as a human being matters in the sciences, and what you bring to the table creates a new version of truth that otherwise wouldn't emerge. And the individual consumes their plate differently,
Right.
and there has to be the understanding that each individual brings their own metabolism to the table, right? So, so there is something powerful there in the understanding that there might be some population findings, but the real magic happens at the individual level, right?
So universalism starts looking pretty suspicious.
Well, exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Well,
right.
well, and of course, and that was, you know, in the kind of work I do, you know, much of it started out working with rats and mice, and we, on purpose, always want to have the same strain. Want the same genetic background, we want everything to be the same. You get better data that way.
Yeah.
But
how
then
much
when you
does
try
it
to transfer it, then it becomes difficult.
Transferability, as they say.
So another question for both of you, and I'll start with Patti. Interdisciplinary work offers great opportunity, as you both have described. But it can cause scholars, particularly more junior scholars, to feel as if they're pulled in multiple directions. And I'm curious what your perspective is on the notion of being pulled in multiple directions, both from a positive point of view and a challenging point of view.
I just want to say, get over it. And you don't have to do every discipline, but what you have to do is more than one. I always like 3, generally speaking. Pick 3. And again, track how the ideas travel the same or differently across those 3. And then see what you got your hands on. See what you can articulate out of that.
Earl?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's an important one for people to think about, I think, because in nutrition, there's so many levels of organization. I've showed you levels of organization from molecules and cells and subcellular things and so forth like that. And the trouble with nutrition is if you really have, for the field to have impact, it has to work at a whole bunch of different levels, starting biologically at the so-called more fundamental levels, but then going into epidemiology, and then going into policy, and going into world health and so forth like that. I think so. But the issue is, I think I agree with you really. Whatever your niche is, try to get good at maybe the next one up, or the next one down, and then cultivate colleagues and collaborators in that, because you're not going to ever be good at everything. And but again, it's important, and the way to do that is to, again, sort of going back to what I said before, if you need a level that you yourself are not good at, make sure you identify people who are, and then try to emulate them, or have them teach you or suggest how to do what you want to have done.
Community, collaborative.
Yeah.
So you both reflected on mentors, people that influenced you, and then you heard some words, at least from Earl's case, you heard some words from folks that you had been the mentor of. Yeah. We have a number of young scholars in the room. What advice do you have to them in terms of being a great mentee?
Being a mentee?
Being a mentee. Being a mentee. In other
I want
words,
to say, just do everything I tell you to.
Okay, we're done here.
Egon Guba said to me one time, he said, your job is to be smarter than me. Your job is to go beyond where I was able to go. So I would say that's the most important thing. And I also want to say, get the basics. Don't just fly off into wherever.
Know them well.
Derrida said, if you're going to deconstruct, you got to have something to deconstruct. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand the heart of the field and the way things usually get done, the dominant, or where's my dominant paradigm thing? If you don't understand the dominant paradigm, how are you going to vary? How are you going to come up with anything creative and new and useful? So learn your basics, and then go beyond them, and go beyond me, who also went beyond the basics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Earl?
Yep. Again, pretty much the same story. There was a famous biochemist who was thought to have said that if you're over 50 and you understand everything your grad students are talking about, you should get better graduates. So I think that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So last question for both of you. As you reflect on the arc of your careers, and I was impressed by both of you reflecting that there's clearly more work to be done.
No, not necessarily.
Well, you've got a book cover without a book, so...
Why do we need the book? My girlfriend's happy.
What are some emerging questions that excite you, that you hope that the next generation of scholars picks up on? Yeah.
Well, that cultural studies and numeracy, I just think there's so much, and there are wonderful people. That's one reason why I can let that go, because I got far enough into it to see these Elizabeth DeFreitas and all her people. They're so smart. They're very digital. They are really running with it. And what they're going to end up doing is exploding the qualitative binary. It's going to just be gone. Nobody's going to even think that way anymore. There's just going to be ways of going about it. that are more or less useful given the research question and the people involved. So that one, and then I would like somebody to pick up Sarah. I've always thought Sarah should go back, stop doing administrivia, go back to being a faculty member, and pick up on that sports and schooling project.
Incidentally, in our College of Education and Human Ecology, we have a whole area on sports, so there's some real fertile territory there. Earl?
Well, that's, I should say, you asked me the question again, but I mean, I think
Sure.
it's what's the future?
What excites you about the
about the
future?
future.
Yeah.
Well, what's exciting about the future is I see my field as just as active as it has ever been. And that moves forward because often in the sciences, it moves forward because of technological advances. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would say that's the hope of the future, that people develop ideas about precision nutrition, they develop ways to look at single cells, they look at single molecules and move. So it's just keep up with that. That goes back to my thing about the guy with the graduate students. I mean, basically, just the future of the field is with the people who are now in it, and they just have to keep up with the frontier of that, whatever that frontier looks like in their specific areas.
All right, everybody, you have your marching orders. Right? What a great pleasure to have a conversation with these two distinguished faculty who leave great legacies for us all to grow from. So please give them another round of applause. Well, thank you all so much. This concludes our event, and I hope that you stick around and have a few conversations with our distinguished guests.
We have
and
more
I
in
think
common than we thought.
I think we got to take some pictures. So thank you.